Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 284, Islam Makhachev defeated Alexander Volkanovski to retain his UFC lightweight title. And this is a topic that I've discussed in countless videos, which I will link them all down in the description if you want to go check them out after this. But since this win by Islam Makhachev, there has been an outright war within the MMA community. People saying Alexander Volkanovski was robbed. People saying there should be an immediate rematch. People saying, Islam Makhachev clearly won. And while I've already done countless videos on the topic, I'm going to sum a lot of those into this video as well. But this video is going to be the reasons I believe that a large portion of the MMA community are unwilling to accept that Islam Makhachev defeated Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 284. We're going to talk about some reasons that are obvious. We're going to talk about some reasons that are not so obvious. We're going to talk about a lot about what I talked in the immediate post-fight live that I did, which will be linked down below. We're going to talk about how I scored it, how I rescored it, and we're also going to talk about the pound-for-pound rankings, which came out today, and there's been a lot of controversy surrounding that as well. So first off, before I get into anything, people have to realize, and this is something that I've kind of hinted on in some live streams, but I haven't talked about it in a dedicated video yet, and I felt like it was perfect for this video. People have to stop letting the decision of a fight overshadow the fact that the fight was amazing. Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 284 is one of the best fights I've ever seen. It had it all. It had momentum swings. It had elite level ability. It had massive stakes on the line. It had an amazing crowd that was super loud and crazy, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. And the fact that people don't always agree with the decision, they're kind of letting it overshadow the fact that this was an amazing fight. This was a very competitive, close fight. And I really believe, regardless of who you believe won, if you believe Alexander Volkanovski won, if you believe Islam Makhachev won, they both should get the ultimate credit, because Alexander Volkanovski went up in weight to challenge one of the most dominant fighters we've seen in the UFC. But I almost feel, while Alexander Volkanovski is getting that credit, people are somehow using a competitive fight for Islam Makhachev with Alexander Volkanovski to discredit Islam Makhachev, which I just find absolutely baffling. I believe Alexander Volkanovski deserves all the credit in the world. But the fact that people are acting as if Islam Makhachev didn't take on the biggest possible challenge. Alexander Volkanovski, pound for pound, #1 fighter in the world, has looked unbelievable. Islam Makhachev took on the biggest possible challenge for him. And I know Volkanovski came up in weight. Volkanovski wanted to come up and attempt to become a two-weight champion. And for some reason, because Volkanovski came up, it's almost one of those situations where, because of the narrative going into the fight, it's a bit of a revisionist history now. People are acting like, well, Islam Makhachev should have dominated him, so therefore, since it was competitive, he doesn't get any credit for it. That's essentially what people are saying. And I really believe that this fight, both guys' stock should go through the roof. And I feel like Alexander Volkanovski's stock has, but I feel like people are trying to diminish what Islam Makhachev did. He went out there against the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world. Keep in mind, September of last year, just a mere couple months ago, people were saying Islam Makhachev hasn't had any challenges. He hasn't fought anyone but bums. He fought Dan Hooker on short notice. People were saying that. Now he dethrones Charles Oliveira in a dominant performance. And in his first title defense, he's facing Alexander Volkanovski, the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world. And I just feel like it's crazy that people are just spinning this somehow into a negative. And I feel like we have to give both fighters the ultimate credit for this fight. The other thing I want to discuss, and I kind of already hinted on it a little bit, every fight that we have that is competitive, that is close, we cannot sit here, and it's something that's become more and more commonplace in the MMA community over the last 5 to 6 years. I feel like when I first started watching the sport, it wasn't this commonplace. Every single time there's a competitive fight, robbery, no matter what the scorecards are. Robbery, robbery, robbery. If the fighter you didn't want to win didn't win, then it's a robbery all of a sudden. We have to stop calling every single fight a robbery just because you don't agree with the decision. Now, I've already done a video on whether or not I believe it was a robbery, but I'm just going to kind of rehash that a little bit. How did I score the fight? When I watched the fight live, and I did a full fight watch along, you can watch it as you can check out the video. I'll link it down in the description where I react live to the fights. I scored it 1, 3, and 4 for Islam Makhachev, and I scored round 2 and round 5 for Volkanovski. And live, I thought round 1 was clear for Islam, round 5 was clear for Volkanovski. I thought 2 and 3 were very close, and I thought 4 was pretty clear for Islam Makhachev as well. And people talking about the 4th round, this is another thing where it's like I couldn't do an individual video on it, but I wanted to talk about it somewhere. If you are scoring round 4 for Alexander Volkanovski, you have no credibility. I don't even want to hear your argument. I'm usually open to all arguments. I don't want to hear your argument on round 4 because people keep saying Islam Makhachev took him down. He got the body triangle. He didn't do anything. And Volkanovski landed those shots while he had his back taken. Now, okay, that's kind of true. I mean, that's what happened there. But people are totally discounting the first 2-3 minutes where Islam Makhachev landed the better shots on the feet. I don't care about those little tiny baby shots that Volkanovski landed when Islam Makhachev was on his back. Even if you want to say he won that position, that doesn't counteract the fact that Islam Makhachev outstruck him on the feet, snapped his head back, and landed the harder shots in the first half or 3/4 of round 4. So if you're scoring round 4 for Alexander Volkanovski, you have no credibility in MMA judging at all. Now, when I went back and rewatched the fight, I thought round 1 was clear for Islam Makhachev. Obviously, I thought round 4 was clear for Islam Makhachev. I thought round 5 was clear for Volkanovski. 2 and 3 were very close. I originally scored 2 for Volkanovski. When I went back and rewatched it, a punch that I thought dropped Islam Makhachev did not actually even connect with Islam Makhachev. So after excluding that, I scored round 2 for Islam Makhachev. Now round 3, I thought was the closest round of the entire fight, and I scored it for Islam Makhachev. I thought he landed the better shots on the feet. So upon rewatch, I scored it 1 through 4 for Islam and round 5 for Alexander Volkanovski. And people are crazy in the fact that they're so focused on the last 2 minutes of the 5th round, okay? Because the way the fight ended, I believe is one of the main reasons that people are unwilling to accept the fact that Islam Makhachev got the decision. Because the way that Volkanovski ended up on top, ground and pounding Islam Makhachev, some people even acted like he was about to get a TKO. Maybe had it gone into another round because Islam Makhachev was tired, hanging on, maybe he would have got a TKO. In no position in the 5th round was Volkanovski close to a TKO of the fight. But I believe that is one of the reasons people are unwilling to accept that Islam Makhachev won this fight. But there's so many different reasons. One of the most minor reasons that I believe people are unwilling to accept it was because of the Australian crowd. The Australian crowd is obviously rooting for Alexander Volkanovski. They want him to win. Therefore, every time he had a big action, the crowd was going wild. While Islam Makhachev, when he did well, the crowd was not cheering. So I think the crowd was a massive factor in people believing that Volkanovski won this fight. Another reason, obviously, and this is pretty obvious as well, Volkanovski is pretty much universally loved, okay? Nobody dislikes Volkanovski. You know, I've been told I'm biased towards Islam Makhachev. I like Alexander Volkanovski. As a fan, I like Alexander Volkanovski more than I like Islam Makhachev. So I can't believe people are claiming that just because I'm giving my honest opinion. I'm going to get a lot of hate just for this video alone. Volkanovski is universally loved, so therefore people want him to win. And also he came in as an underdog, which we're going to talk about in a second. The other thing is the stats, the dreaded stats. People, every time there's a close fight, people like to circulate these stat pages and saying, oh, so-and-so outstruck so-and-so. They did it with the O'Malley-Piotr Yan fight, which I actually believe was a robbery. You know, that was a clear winner that was stolen away from him. But that's a whole topic for a whole nother video that I've already done. And people like to circulate around the stats. I will never use the stats to support my argument when it's in my favor. And I will never accept the stats as a legitimate argument to disprove what I'm trying to say. First off, anyone sharing those stats around, do you have any idea who compiles those stats? What credibility do they have? And half the time, I don't care who you are, you can look at those numbers and they just seem way off. Absolutely crazy off. And for me, I will never, if the stats said that Islam Makhachev outstruck him, I wouldn't point to the stats because they have no legitimate credibility at all. So if you're ever talking about stats, just completely leave them out of the conversation because there's no legitimacy to them. The other reason, and this is kind of what sparked this video in general, the other reason I believe people are unwilling to accept the fact that Islam Makhachev won this fight was because Islam Makhachev won this fight with his striking ability, not with his grappling. And people can't believe that because going into this fight, people had this preconceived notion. If Volkanovski can stuff the takedowns, then he will win the fight. And I even thought that. If Volkanovski can keep it standing, Volkanovski will most likely win this fight. And Volkanovski was able to keep it standing for a large portion of this fight, and I still think he lost. I actually tweeted out, if you take out all the grappling exchanges in this fight, I believe Islam Makhachev clearly won this fight. That's how good I believe Islam Makhachev did on the feet in this fight. He landed so many solid strikes. Volkanovski had his moments too. I'm not saying that he didn't. But people can't even wrap their minds around because Islam Makhachev is known as one of the best grapplers in the world. Going into the fight, people thought if Volkanovski keeps it standing, he will win. And in this fight, whether it be the threat of the takedown from Islam Makhachev that caused this to happen, Islam Makhachev was able to outstrike Volkanovski in the majority of this fight. And another hot take that I had, if you cut this fight off at 23 minutes, and I know this is a hypothetical situation, you don't have to comment down below and tell me that. If you cut this fight off at 23 minutes, you cut off those last 2 minutes, Islam Makhachev wins 50-45 in my opinion. And I think people just can't wrap their head around that Islam Makhachev was able to outstrike an elite striker like Alexander Volkanovski, who just put on a world-class striking clinic against another elite striker in Max Holloway, you know, just 6-7 months ago at UFC 276. People can't wrap their head around it. Now, the number one reason, the major reason that I believe people can't wrap their head around this decision is because people were massively underestimating Alexander Volkanovski's chances coming into this fight. I said this on my post-fight. I've said this ad nauseum. But people had such low expectations for Alexander Volkanovski, they confused having a great performance and overperforming compared to expectations. They confuse it with winning a fight. Volkanovski, in most people's minds, was the smaller guy. He was supposed to come out there. He was supposed to get mauled. He was supposed to get taken down, beaten up, and finished. That's what most people had going into this fight. Now, me personally, I favored Islam Makhachev. I picked Islam Makhachev by finish. But I thought this fight would be very, very competitive. And going into this fight, I couldn't believe how many people were underestimating Alexander Volkanovski's chances. You can go back and watch my prediction video before the fight. I talk about it in that very video. So I think going into this fight, expecting to see the grappler take him down and dominate Volkanovski on the ground, and then you see Volkanovski, oh wait, he's reversing position in the clinch. Oh wait, he gets taken down and he's popping right back to his feet. He must be winning. But he was getting outstruck. And one thing I found interesting in this fight is Volkanovski has a very slight reach advantage over Islam Makhachev. When watching the striking live, I don't know if it's something off with the measurements the UFC has because they're known to have that, or it was just the fact that Islam was throwing straighter shots while Volkanovski was throwing more looping shots. It seemed like Islam Makhachev had a better gauge on the range, and it seemed like he had more reach in this fight. And Volkanovski was hitting a lot of air in this fight as well. But I just believe that people had such low expectations for Volkanovski coming in against Islam Makhachev, who's this guy who's on this long win streak. And I know Volkanovski's on this long win streak too. Coming in, dominating Charles Oliveira at UFC 280, they thought Volkanovski had no chance. So the fact that he put on a masterful performance, or not a masterful performance because he lost, but the fact that he exceeded expectations so greatly of most people, I think people say, well, the fact that it was even competitive, he wins. He wins. That's what people are saying, I believe. And I also think there is cult-like followings in MMA. And one of the biggest cult-like followings is the Muslim fan base. And I've talked about this in my video about Dagestani fighters. And the point isn't the Muslim fan base here. The point is there is people who are so annoyed by that crazy Muslim fan base. I deal with it on a regular basis. When I posted my Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev prediction, and I picked Charles Oliveira, people were saying, oh, you just hate Islam because of this or because of that. They are such a cult-like following that there's people that believe they need to be equally as annoying in the polar opposite. So there is genuinely a group of people that hate the entire group of Muslim fighters in the UFC just because of the annoying fan base on the other side. And there's also people, and I talked about this in my Dagestani video, I'm going to link about 100 videos down in the description. I'll link that down below too. It's called Are Dagestanis Ruining the Sport? But there is a group of people in the MMA community, the MMA fan base, that truly just hate fighters because they are Muslim. And if you don't want to accept that, I'm not saying to what capacity it is, but if you don't want to accept that's there, then I don't know what to tell you, but it does exist. And, I think there's a lot of people that may just hate Islam Makhachev just based on that. And, it's funny, and I mentioned this in that very video, but the reason I say that, and I back that up with support, is you have the people that hate him that say they're boring. They say Islam Makhachev's boring, Khabib Nurmagomedov's boring, all the Dagestani Muslim guys are boring. These same guys that say that are the biggest fans of Colby Covington, Bryce Mitchell, and Sean Strickland. So when I hear that, I'm like, well, wait a second. There has to be another reason. And just taking an educated guess, that's my best educated guess, because I'll tell you this, Islam Makhachev is not a boring fighter. Khabib Nurmagomedov's not a boring fighter. I can go on the list ad nauseum, but it does exist. And when they see these people win and they don't like them, they try to delegitimize it. I had so many people in my chat saying, what about Dan Hooker's claims? It's on Islam Makhachev to disprove it. People were saying that. It's on Islam Makhachev to disprove claims that were made with no evidence put behind it. Dan Hooker made these claims. He did not present any evidence. I'm so tired of people putting out claims, tweeting it out, and then there's no evidence behind it. And then everybody runs with it. This will be something that's talked about for the next couple years. Every time Islam Makhachev is supposed to fight, people are going to talk about, oh, he took an IV. Remember, he took an IV versus Alexander Volkanovski? There has still not been a single shred of evidence that has come out that Islam Makhachev took an IV. Maybe he did, but we don't have any evidence. I operate in fact when I'm talking about this stuff. And it's just crazy that just because the dislike, people have to try to delegitimize these wins. And it's not on him to disprove it. It's on somebody else to prove that it happened. And I know people are talking about the pictures. First off, most of those pictures were taken before the weigh-ins, okay? So why is he taking an IV before the weigh-ins? Second off, usually during fight week, and I believe Islam's manager came out and said this, there's usually mandatory blood work. So it could have easily been from that. It could have easily been from nothing. It could have easily been photoshopped. We don't know. And now you have a situation where the rankings have changed today, and the pound-for-pound number one fighter is Alexander Volkanovski, which I think is particularly egregious. But I'm not going to complain about it too much because the rankings really don't matter. Go on the UFC's website, see who compiles these rankings. I've never heard of any of them, basically. And half of them that are listed have came out and said, we have nothing to do with the rankings. What people are doing with Alexander Volkanovski by claiming he won a fight that he did not win, by leaving him in the pound-for-pound number one spot, they are essentially giving him a participation trophy. That is what is happening here. And I truly believe if everything was right in the world, Islam Makhachev should be number one pound for pound. But does it really matter? You have a panel of 10 random people who we don't even know, they're nameless, on the UFC's website, placing Alexander Volkanovski at number one. It's essentially meaningless regardless. So it doesn't really matter if Islam Makhachev's there or not. So I'm not going to sit here and cry about it too much, but it is worth noting. But the rankings are useless. I've been saying this. I literally have a video on my channel from, I believe, early 2021. You know, when I first started the channel, it's one of the videos I made. The rankings are useless, and pound for pound is particularly useless because people are saying, well, Volkanovski put on a good show and he was the smaller fighter, so therefore he should stay at number one. Well, that's not how it works. Pound for pound is supposed to be if each fighter was sized up to a certain weight class, then that fighter would beat the other fighter. Volkanovski sized up to 155. He weighed in at 155. Say what you will, he's a smaller guy, whatever. He sized up to 155 and he lost. Therefore, he is not the pound for pound number one. And I said this when Adesanya lost to Jan Blachowicz. You had Jan Blachowicz behind Adesanya on the pound for pound list. Made absolutely no sense. Right now, I think you got Adesanya ahead of Alex Pereira on the pound for pound list. Makes absolutely no sense. So, again, it doesn't matter. But if they had everything right, if the pound for pound rankings were legitimate, it's so subjective. How would they ever make it legitimate anyway? But if they were right, Islam Makhachev should be sitting at number one. But at the end of the day, again, the rankings are just a way for casual fans who don't follow the sport as closely as a lot of other fans, for them to understand what's going on and why certain matchups are being made, and also to tell them, okay, this is how skilled a fighter is. Oh, they're ranked number two in the pound for pound. And, you know, essentially this is meaningless, and I don't think anyone should be complaining about it too much. And as far as a rematch, and again, I've also done a video on this, I don't want to see a rematch made between these two guys right now. Volkanovski should go fight Yair. If he wins that fight, while Islam Makhachev fights Beneil Dariush, if he wins that fight, then they should do Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski 2 in early 2024. I think that is the way to go. Volkanovski versus Rodriguez is a fight that we have to see, and Makhachev versus Dariush is a fight we have to see. The decision was close, but I really do believe there was a clear winner in Islam Makhachev. And I do understand, even if Volkanovski would have got the decision, I would have said it was a bad decision, but I wouldn't have said it was an outright robbery. Because even going through it with a fine-tooth comb, the second and third round are very close. Fifth round is clearly Volkanovski. Now, I do believe there was a clear winner of that second and third round, and I do believe it was Makhachev. But I do understand, especially operating within the parameters that the judges have to operate within. They watch it once. They watch it live. Therefore, it would not have been a robbery had Volkanovski got the decision. But I just think it's crazy. People are making up every excuse in the book to say Islam Makhachev shouldn't have won this fight and that they should discredit this win by saying, you know, he took an IV, this and that. Nonetheless, this was one of the best MMA fights I've ever seen. I think it raises the stock of both fighters, and I can't wait to see Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski, whoever they may fight next. Let me know what you guys think about all this down in the comments. Am I absolutely crazy? Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.